Today's session is climate justice and social justice. Again, this is part of an overarching summit that's leading to a contest. And the overarching themes of this are, why is climate change happening? How will climate change impact us and future generations and impact us in the future? And most importantly, how can we, working together, intervene and actually slow the rate of climate change or prevent it and mitigate its impacts so we have a better future? And today's session is on climate justice and social justice. We're happy to have speakers from the state and local level to share with you more about the impacts of climate change in the state and in your regions, and the efforts that are being put in place to address climate change and those equity impacts. We hope that this is going to be an interactive session. So let's just review how we can do that. In the slide that you should be seeing right now, it shows that you can interact in a few different ways. First, you can use the chat feature, and we can respond to your questions, and you can share your thoughts with other students or other teachers. If we ask you to raise your hand, and that's one of the, we might say, everyone who has heard of something before, raise their hands. There's a little raise hand button, and that will come up. And then if you've got formal questions for the presenters, there's a Q&A box, and we will go through those questions and make sure that they all get answered, mostly by the presenters speaking, but it might also be in writing. And so with that, we'll take it away to the program itself, and let's get started. Our first speaker is Meishka Mitchell, and she is the Vice President of Cooper's Ferry Partnership, which is a community development organization and so much more in Camden, New Jersey. And Meishka, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I hope that everybody's having a great day today on this first day of March. As Randy pointed out, I am Meishka Mitchell. I'm Vice President at an organization called Cooper's Ferry Partnership. It's a nonprofit organization that does community and economic development in the city of Camden. And we do a variety of things, from working on arts and culture and placemaking to working on the environment. And that's a lot about what I will talk to you about today. I know you guys have already been hearing a lot about climate justice. And for Camden, this particular talk will talk about how water equity fits into climate justice for the city of Camden and the work that is underway. The city of Camden, New Jersey, it's a place, if you guys haven't been there, maybe you've been there for the aquarium, or maybe you've been there for a show at the concert venue. But it's a place that a lot of times the things that you hear about the city aren't positive things. It's a place where the majority of the population is made up of people of color. So there are about 40% of the population is African American, and about 50% of the population is Hispanic. And a large number, about 30% of the 74,000 residents in the city themselves are what people would deem to be in poverty, meaning their income meets a threshold to which their basic needs are often not met, which brings additional challenges to living in the city and being able to provide for families. And when we think about Camden and we think about New Jersey in particular, I know this is a image that might have been widely circulated around the Superstorm Sandy event. When we're thinking about flooding in the state of New Jersey and climate change in New Jersey, we're often thinking about the impacts that climate change will have to sea level rise and its impact to the shore communities in our state. And what's not often talked about is the relationship between that same water, the storms that'll happen as a result of the climate change and increased rainfall, increased magnitude of storms, and how that'll impact places like the city of Camden. So what does the other side of flooding look like in places like Camden? And that could look a lot of different ways. The pictures that you see on the screen actually did not take place during a hurricane or a superstorm. uh, both, well, the first picture that shows the homes was taken after a 1 inch rainfall in the city of Camden. And this is the backs of people's houses. They have basements that are flooded on a regular basis. If you can see in the residence to the far right, their sort of basement window is under the water, as you can see. Or if you're looking at the one which is on the downtown Camden waterfront, this is about a block or so away from the aquarium, where the flooding is about 5 foot high in the street. Up at the Riverline stop, it's up to the platform, which is an elevated platform, and that's how much rain you can get. And that one was in the middle of sort of a summer thunderstorm, which was rainfall that came at a very high rate. You know, the city of Camden is a waterfront community. It's not on the shore, but the city of Camden is surrounded on 3 sides by water. It's almost an island. It has 15 miles of waterfront property. Most of it is inaccessible to the public, which is another climate justice topic for another day. But you know, when we're thinking about the rise in sea levels, we're also talking about the rise in the rivers. In the case of Camden, is the Delaware River and the Cooper River that surround the city, and how that will also impact the city of Camden as it moves forward. You know, combine all of that with the existing infrastructure in the city of Camden. Camden has what is called a combined sewer system, meaning that the water that comes from the rain and the water that comes from inside your house, like when you flush the toilet or brush your teeth or wash dishes, which I'm sure is your favorite chore, all of that water goes into the same pipes. In other places, that's rainwater and the storm water and the sewage, which are two different things, often go in different pipes. How many of you, and I'll say by a raise of hand on the in your Zoom, do you know what system you currently have at your house? Do you have a combined sewer system, or do you have what is called a separate system, where you have two different sets of pipes for those two different functions? You can either use the raise hand feature, or feel free to drop it in the chat if you happen to know what's at your house. I would venture to say that many of you, especially if you are in a newer community, out in the suburbs, those communities generally have a separate sewer system and a separate stormwater system for those pipes, which helps when there's things like heavy rains to make sure that it's not combined sewage that backs up into homes or streets or into the parks and open spaces. In places like Camden that do have a combined sewer system, and you know, you're thinking about, they have pipes that run out into the waterways that discharge that combined sewer system in the case of extreme rainfall that tends to overwhelm the system. And with climate change, that means that those pipes that go out into the river are going to be more inclined to be underwater, like the bottom left picture. And then because the pipes are often over 100 years old, like in Camden, sometimes they're just old and filled with mud or muck, that tends to clog up the system themselves. In 2011, partners on both government, nonprofit, city, state, and local levels got together to form the Camden Smart Initiative in order to help to think about how green infrastructure and other tools can help to think about managing the stormwater in the city of Camden to help to stop the localized flooding that was occurring in many of the neighborhoods in the city. That initiative today does everything from community education and outreach. So, talking to students like you, talking to other community groups about climate change and the importance of managing stormwater, to doing actual projects that help to capture the stormwater, to thinking about policies that ensure that new development takes into account its impact on the stormwater in the city of Camden. And how did all of that come about? And so I think It's important to note that in 2011, when that initiative started, it was really because of community voices getting together and really saying that a change was needed. For many years, people knew that it flooded in the city of Camden, but not everyone knew the magnitude or the impact that it was having on the lives of the residents themselves until we heard it directly from the residents. And that was from community meetings. And this slide shows a page from a neighborhood plan in a location called Kramer Hill, where residents were given fake money at a community meeting to say where, if they had, for all of the problems that they had identified, where would they like to spend their money first? And they could have put all of the money on one thing or several dollars on a couple different things, but that would show after that exercise where their priorities were. And the number one priority that had been identified by that exercise was the improvement of the flooding conditions in what was their primary commercial corridor and their primary open space called Vanita Park. And that really showed us, really by residents speaking with their fake dollars, how important it was and how impactful the flooding in their neighborhood was. Here's a slight video that'll show you some of the residents and the impact that it has.
One time in my neighborhood, me and my sister were in the car driving to her friend's house, and we didn't see the water in the way of us, so we got stuck in the water.
One time when it rained, my aunt's house flooded and she had to take the water out from her basement with the vacuum cleaner, and it also stunk.
One time, when my house flooded, me and my family had to clean up all the water with buckets and then take it out.
I hope flooding can stop so people don't move out of my neighborhood, because it's not like it's gonna happen forever. Like, you can fix it.
There's an important quote that was noted on the screen during that video that said, you shouldn't have to worry every time it rains. And for the residents of this neighborhood in particular, the Kramer Hill neighborhood in Camden, they did have to worry and still do, to some extent, have to worry every time it rains. And, I want you guys to think about what those students said, and did anything in that video have an impact on you or anything resonate with you about what any of those students said? It's important to note, when we're talking about it raining and there being flooding, because the city of Camden has a combined sewer system, it's more than just water. It is sewage that is flooding the streets and the homes and the waterways. When you combine 1 gallon of fresh water from the sky with a gallon of sewage from the sewer system, you get 2 gallons of sewage. And that is the quality of life, the health problem, the climate injustice that we're talking about for Camden. In this particular neighborhood, it does come with a happier ending. And we're talking about a location called Vanita Park, where this location, if you can see on the map, outside this green area is the back channel of the Delaware River. This entire site used to be a tributary, so a sort of small river stream that ran to that back channel of the Delaware. And early on in the 50s, someone thought it was a mosquito filled place and didn't like it anymore. And they filled this location in. And for people that understand how land works and how water works, that water still needs somewhere to go. And so many cases and many times this area is inundated with floodwaters. And so we work together with partners and really with some students, a middle school students from St. Anthony of Padua in Camden on a project that really helped to stop the flooding in this neighborhood. Students led the way. And so not only did they identify flooding as an issue, they talked about other quality of life things in this neighborhood park that was their primary open space for the community. And they helped to give the park a makeover, some of it by hand. So if you think about the benches that these two students are sitting on that were hand painted by the students, this was a middle school. So these are students grades 6 through 8. And so what they did was, not always is there time. And I know a lot of you are here with your teachers as part of school. Sometimes, and there's not time always in the part of the school curriculum to work on these kind of outside projects. So they actually formed an after school club called the Vanita Park Student Task Force. They were able to get a staff member to be their liaison and get permission from their school to form the club. And they met after schools, after school time. I often met with them to help them to figure out how they could work together, how they could talk to elected officials, how they could make things work. We also work with, we were talking about bigger students. So these are college level students. That bottom picture is students from Rowan University in their engineering department that we work with to do a virtual lab that helped to map the flooding in the neighborhood with 3D virtual glasses and something called the cave. So very interesting ways to work with two different sets of audiences. And in the end, it took several years. We were able to do many of the small improvements first, like some of the bench painting, the mural that's pictured at the top. But there was also a multi-million-dollar project funded through grant sources that created new basins, new places for collection for stormwater in the park, and also recreated a section of that tributary to the Delaware River to help to decrease or help to give a place for the water to go in that park. And that has been successful at helping to mitigate some of the localized flooding in this area. While all of the project, there's still one additional phase left to go. So there are still times where it floods, and this is still in the floodplain. When we're thinking about impacts for places like Camden, as more rain is coming, as more intense storms, as climate change brings on new dynamics for how the weather impacts our communities, we have to remember that in urban neighborhoods like Camden that may not have the resources to be able to tackle these things, that there are additional things that we have to consider when we're thinking about climate justice. And with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator, and feel free to take any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Meishka. So please ask some questions and I'll get it started. So, Meishka, I think, it might be good to talk a little bit more about the connection to social justice and how these impacts don't hit everyone the same. And I think, as most people know, Camden is one of the kind of poorer cities in New Jersey. It has, in terms of the resources that are available to the people there and to the local government to fix problems, it's a lot less than in other places. So is this kind of flooding just an issue that you'd see in Camden? And how is it going to play out across the rest of New Jersey, especially with that eye to kind of social justice?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as we talked about, right, there are several different sides of flooding, and flooding is something that many communities in the state of New Jersey face. However, the impacts of that flooding are indeed different based on the makeup of those communities. For a place like Camden, where 30% of the population is in poverty, their ability to bounce back from instances that would be impactful are much different than places with higher incomes. For instance, if it's flooding in Camden, and as one of those students pointed out, if my basement floods and I have, a washing machine down there and some clothes, or a finished basement, and it happens to flood, also, because it's Camden, it's not just water, it's combined sewage, right? I may not have the resources to not only clean it up, I may not have the resources to replace the things that were damaged. I may not have home insurance that would cover that. And I am more apt to have people in my household that may be impacted by that. Meaning, I maybe have people in my household that have asthma or other health ailments, also because of the nature of being impoverished, that would impact their ability. As
Yep.
opposed to someone living in a wealthy community, if my basement floods, it's probably just water, in which case the cleanup would be a lot less intense and a little different. I may have the resources to just go out and hire a contractor to come and clean it up. And I also may have home insurance that might be able to replace what was damaged.
Yep. And another thing that people can do, which not everyone can do, is just move. So I used to live in New Brunswick, where Rutgers University is, and now I live in Highland Park, right across the river. And when I lived in New Brunswick, I lived in a house that I owned, and the basement flooded with raw sewage. And we were able to pay to clean it up, but we were told basically, because of where we are and because of the sewer system there, this might not be the last time that happened. And that was one of the reasons why we left.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to afford to do that. And so who moved in there? It was someone who had fewer resources than we did.
Absolutely.
And so sort of places sort themselves out that way. And we see also, I think, in terms of flooding, I think a lot of people have images of flood-prone areas. And I think most people probably remember Hurricane Sandy, and you showed that image
Mm-hmm.
of the shore getting flooded. And I think most people have an image of like really nice houses by the beach
Right.
getting flooded. And so, yes, that's one kind of flooding that we get when we get ocean flooding. But then climate change is projected to increase the amount of rainfall. And not only increase the amount of rainfall, but we're supposed to have more rainfall in a smaller number of rainfall events. So what does that mean? It means that it's all going to come at once in big storms, and there'll be less time for the land to absorb it and all those little tributaries that you showed and all those pipes to move that water out, which means it's just going to increase flooding. So the places, primarily the cities, primarily where poorer people live, are projected to get a whole lot more of this type of flooding.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So, all right. Does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to put in the chat? All right. Sounds good. And if anyone does get a question as we go forward, feel free, pop it into the chat, ask the question, and we can always circle back to it.
Great. Thank you.
So I'm going to present this slide. Our next speaker is Pruitt, and she's the Deputy Director of the Office of Clean Energy. The Office of Clean Energy Equity in the Division of Clean Energy at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And they are like the state government agency that regulates power companies and utilities. But before we turn it over to her, which we'll do in just a minute, I'm going to share a brief slide that kind of sets up her part of the conversation, because I wanted to make the connection between flooding and climate change and energy, which is what Crystal Pruitt and her agency are in charge of. And so when we think about flooding and increased flooding, of course, that comes from climate change, which comes from greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions primarily come from how we utilize energy, utilizing too much of it and utilizing energy, excuse me, that comes from fossil fuels. So something gets burned, essentially releasing greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we lower the greenhouse gas emissions that we emit from energy? And so here are just a few things to think about. One is your school operations. Your school is a building, it has lights, it has heat, it uses stuff, and all that stuff comes with a cost in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that are utilized. So how do we lower greenhouse gas emissions? So one is you can lower it from school operations and facilities, right? So there's the school building itself. You can make the school building more energy efficient. You can insulate it. You can have, a better heating system. Better lights, LED lights. A lot of different things that can be done inside the school itself. You can manage the fleet. You can have more efficient school buses. You can have electric school buses. You can also manage how people get to the school. So do you make it easy for people to walk and bike to school? You can think about the operations. So the landscaping. How are you landscaping? How much are you landscaping? Are you planting plants that require a lot of water, which has to be treated and then pumped, which uses energy, or that require fertilizer? Solar panels. Do you have solar panels on your building? Are you actually buying green energy? In New Jersey, you can buy energy from whoever you want, and you can buy solar energy or wind energy or water energy, or you can buy coal and other fossil fuel-based energy. So that's another thing that people have to be mindful of. Of course, your waste and recycling, and in particular food waste, has a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, behavior changes. Do you turn off the lights? Where do you set the heat? These are all things that will impact it. And then in terms of the community, things that your community can do include making your town an electric vehicle friendly place and putting in public electric vehicle charging infrastructure. If there's no place to charge your cars, no one's going to use electric vehicles. Of course, the town can buy green energy, and the town can buy green energy for all the residents of that town in one big action. You can be advocates. You can be advocates for your town to be more energy efficient or to use green energy, but you can also be advocates to the state and to the federal government as well. And then there's community-led solar initiatives. So groups of people in a community or even in a school can get together and all buy solar panels together and get a discount. And then you can do outreach into the community. There are a tremendous number of things that residents of the community, as well as the businesses, in particular the small businesses, can do to save energy. And you can help them do those things. You can educate them about the steps that they can take. And there's also a lot of money that's available to them, which I think we might hear more about. And you can help them take advantage of it. So there's a lot of things that directly impact energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and that also then directly impact flooding and all these other impacts, which, as we've heard, have a direct impact on social equity as well. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Pruitt. And Crystal, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Pruitt, and I am a Deputy Director in the Division of Clean Energy in the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And my specific charge is running the Office of Clean Energy Equity. So before we get into that, Randy did kind of give us a little bit of an introduction, but using the raise hand function, can you tell me how many people have ever heard of the Board of Public Utilities before today? I mean, I've heard of it because I work there.
Should I vote? I'm a ringer.
Huh?
I was just making a joke. I said, should I vote? I'm a ringer.
You can vote if you'd like. So I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Board of Public Utilities, what my office is charged to do, and some of the ways that energy really does impact the conversations that we're having about climate change and the environment. And thank you, Kelly. Someone's heard of it. So let's take a look. Okay. So, New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, Energy and Climate Change. And is my screen sharing appropriately? Okay, perfect. All right, so as Randy mentioned, this state agency oversees and regulates the utilities. That's natural gas, electricity, water, telecommunications, cable, television. So the federal government actually has more power over telecommunications and cable TV, but we are available for any customer service issues. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, we're going to focus on natural gas and electricity and a bit of water. So we really do regulate what is known as investor owned. So we're thinking PSE&G, New Jersey Natural Gas, Atlantic City Electricity, just to name a few. And I don't know if any of you know who your utilities are. If you want to put those in the chat, if you are aware of who provides you electricity or gas or water. And while I do that, I'll continue. So we're responsible for monitoring the utility service, developing energy programs, and responding to consumer complaints. So what's really interesting about this particular state department is that it's a quasi-judicial body. So does anyone know what quasi means? You can put that in the chat if you know what that means.
No answers so far.
Okay, so I will tell you. So quasi means in some sense or to a degree. And does anyone know what judicial means? So judicial means ordered or enforced by a court. So what I'm saying is that New Jersey Board of Public Utilities operates somewhat like a court does. So when you have court, you have a judge. But in the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, we have what are known as commissioners. And it's made up of 5 commissioners, and they vote on actions to be taken by the board. And those commissioners are appointed by the governor, who are then confirmed by the Senate for staggered 6-year terms. So I know you probably weren't expecting a civics lesson, but here's a mini one. So in the Division of Clean Energy, there is a new office called the Office of Clean Energy Equity. And this office was created last year, and it's charged with making sure that every New Jerseyan has access to clean energy. So does anyone, and you could put it in the chat, does anyone have an example or examples of what clean energy is? Yeah, those are some great examples. So wind, solar are examples of clean energy. So it's energy that we create without necessarily using what some people refer to as dirty energy or fossil fuels or anything that kind of creates more greenhouse gases and emissions issues. The Division of Clean Energy is really important because we're trying to address climate change in that way by moving us towards what we refer to as a clean energy future where we start using more electricity, like EVs or electric vehicles. We use more solar, and we're thinking about things differently. So for me, in my office, I am responsible for making sure that every clean energy program or idea or thought is thought of in an equity lens. So you hear equity a lot, you hear things like social justice and equality, but when we're talking about equity versus something like an equality, equality is that each individual is given the same resources or opportunities. So individual group get the same opportunities. What equity does, equity recognizes that not everyone starts at the same place. So the role of equity is providing the specific resources and specific opportunities so that everyone can have an equal outcome. So when I'm working to make sure that we're taking into account that different residents, different neighborhoods, different people need different things, and they might need more or less assistance. So this is actually very new and to a degree very revolutionary, because when we have conversations about energy, they're often thought of in dollars and cents. They're thought of in terms of ratepayers, and that's rates. Those are the bills that your parents receive and they have to pay. So the thing is, rates are equal. They're not, I guess, changed depending on your level of income. It's always based on level of use. So what we know is that lower income individuals, their energy burden and their energy bill takes up a lot more of their income, which kind of hurts because they're struggling to pay bills. So the importance of energy use and discussions about energy when we're addressing things like social justice is also talking about affordability and access, and how do we help people use less electricity so they pay less on their bills. And I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to put questions in the chat and we will get to them so we can clarify. So what does this have to do with climate change? Now, Randy talked about it very briefly, but when we are producing energy and when we are using energy, we have to produce more. And for the most part, a lot of our energy is from fossil fuels, specifically natural gas gets used a lot. So when we have to convert this to energy, sometimes we're doing it, or a lot of times we're doing it in a way that creates emissions. So emissions is sometimes it's a fancy way of saying what goes into the air, or it depends, or sometimes, what goes into the ocean. It's what comes out of the process. And a lot of times it's not really great stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of areas have really dense groups of these, I guess, facilities that create these kind of these emissions. So I guess an example, if you've ever driven on the turnpike heading north, and I think it's around exit 13, 12 to 14, when you're heading to New York, it smells differently because you have all those refineries. Well, sometimes that type of thing gets clustered in people's neighborhoods. And unfortunately, when we think about environmental justice and social justice, we have to recognize that a lot of those times, those facilities that create these emissions and those smells and the smogs are placed in communities that do not have the same power or ability to fight against them. And unfortunately, these things are not accidental. They're on purpose due to different types of regulations and red tape and bureaucracy, which will allow different companies to kind of get into a neighborhood, and then once they're in, they can expand. So when we're talking about what this has to do with social justice and equity, if we can reduce our energy use, that means we don't have to rely on these plants or these energy producing facilities that create these emissions the same way. So one, you're reducing emissions that improves air quality to these neighborhoods that we will refer to as overburdened. And two, we're reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that we are creating. And that ultimately helps the environment and reduces the certain climate related impacts like flooding. So when we have these conversations, it's also really important to recognize that not every neighborhood is impacted the same way. Now, Meishka did a really good job of walking you through the issues that impact Camden, but the issues that impact Camden might not be the issues that impact Cherry Hill, or the issues that impact New Brunswick might not impact Edison. So energy impact can shift depending on where you live, but it's still really important that we're all doing our part equally. So energy efficiency can change the world. So right now, the Board of Public Utilities is really pushing for energy efficiency. Has anyone ever heard of energy efficiency before? You can just put it in the chat. Okay, so it seems like you guys have heard of energy efficiency. So it's really, really common. So when people talk about energy efficiency, they usually think about light bulbs or appliances or something like that. But the concept of energy efficiency is how do you get the output? And apologies to the teachers, because I'm going to use a word. I'm going to use the word to define it. So sorry. How do we get the most impact, the best and most efficient way without using the same amount of power? So let's use light bulbs for an example. So light bulbs used to have these filaments. And I don't know if I'm dating myself because I feel like we've moved to kind of LED light bulbs. So that's really not the same anymore. But prior, maybe even like 10 to 15 years ago, used filaments. And the filament, electricity would go on one side and it would light up the filament and it'd be a circuit and it would light up. It was great. It changed people's lives, we could see, but it also used a lot of energy. So technology came about and we started using LED light bulbs where you get the same amount of brightness and sometimes even more brightness with less energy use. So that's how you can think about the concept of energy efficiency. We're trying to reduce the amount of consumption, the amount of eating energy, and still getting the outcome like the brightness of a light or a lamp. And that's how we think about it. So when we talk about energy efficiency, we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which I mentioned before, which has impacts on climate or climate-related events and health conditions. Energy efficiency programs can reduce energy burdens in households and help them save money. And what's really neat about it is it sometimes, well, it is one of the simplest and cheapest ways that we can make an individual impact when it comes to reducing energy usage. And also, and I'm not sure you guys are looking this far in the future, but green energy and energy efficiency can create new jobs. So the technologies and the science going into clean energy are going to be so revolutionary. So, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of positions for people to do them. So how can we make it fair for everyone? That's ultimately the question. So for a very long time, there really hasn't been a focus on how do we make this fair. So for an example, you know, solar panels and having solar on your house. That's such a great example of like, you're doing clean energy, you're trying to kind of reduce emissions, and that's a great thing. But what happens if you live in an apartment building and you don't own your own home? How can you participate and how do you get those benefits? And for a while, those conversations weren't really happening. But then someone started putting two together that if we're trying to make an impact, everyone has to be able to participate. So that's the role of my office kind of comes in plays, where we have the discussions about how do we make it fair and accessible for everyone. So Randy talked about this briefly, and I won't go into it completely, as you can kind of see it on the slides, but there is something that the board does, and that's called the Community Solar Program. So it provides access to solar energy to people who rent, as well as households, institutions, or businesses whose roofs don't allow them to have solar installation. So you create what's known as a solar array, which is just panels of solar, and it's divided amongst people so they can have access to it. So it helps lower income communities have this access to clean energy and helps them save money. So here's a little graphic about kind of what it looks like. And as I mentioned before, electric vehicles and electric vehicle programs. So this might not have been mentioned, but in the state of New Jersey, a bulk of our greenhouse gas emissions actually come from the transportation sector. So that's what we refer to as heavy duty, and that could be trucks, that could be deliveries, that can be school buses, but it also can be individual cars. So it's a multi-pronged approach because it's going to take a bunch of different ways. But one of the things that the board does is, incentivize, and that makes, incentivize means make more beneficial, right? For people to adopt electric vehicle usage. So we do have a grant from the US Department of Energy to figure out how we can adopt electric vehicle programs in urban areas and underserved communities, trying to address that because, in some neighborhoods, if you live near a factory and you have a lot of trucks, or you live near a bus depot and you have a lot of buses that idle, that creates one, greenhouse gas emissions, and two, air quality issues, which create health issues for communities that might not have the same resources and availability to get proper healthcare. So there's programs for homes, and as you can see, there's a lot of different choices for homes. But since we're talking about social justice and equity, I would like us to focus a little bit more about comfort partners. And this is something that, for you all to be aware of, but it's a free energy saving and education program that's geared to low income homeowners. So it helps if they're able to qualify, they get free services, which is really important. And that's energy efficient lighting, hot water conservation, replacement of, appliances that are not energy efficient. You would be surprised how much energy an old refrigerator can take up. There's things like installation upgrades. And when I say installation, is the stuff between your walls that keeps in the hot air and keeping the cold air when the appropriate seasons are in. Another thing that the board is also focusing on is making sure that people understand that there are assistance programs if people are having a hard time affording or being able to afford their utilities, and making sure that vulnerable people don't have their utilities shut off in the dead of winter, for example, winter termination program, and other services like that. And so what can you do in your home? So it seems really simple, and I'm sure you've heard of it. If your parents are ever just like, don't leave the window open, I have the air conditioning on, and so on and so forth. So it's making sure you're regulating your heat and cooling systems. So not playing with the thermostat, not necessarily turning it all the way up during the winter, and not necessarily going all the way down in the summer. So it's also using things like ceiling fans, if you have them, to improve airflow and gentle breezes, and simple things like turning the lights off or appliances off when you leave the room and you're not using them. things like curtains actually make a really big deal. If you have, you know, there are many brands of curtains that actually keep out light and also kind of keep out cold air. And also using less hot water. So there's a lot of energy efficiency discussions, and you've probably seen, for your washing machines, a cold water function. But using less hot water, as you can see, can account for at least, the use of hot water accounts for about 12% of a family's utility bill. And that's because you have to heat the water up. So that is energy consumption. So when possible, if you have the availability and you are lucky enough to have a washing machine in your own home, which is a thing of privilege in of itself, wash your clothes in cold water. Take more showers versus a bath. Install a low flow shower head and faucet, and fix any leaks. So that is what I have to share with you. And I guess I'll open it up to questions. I know that was a lot, but thank you for sitting through it.
Thanks, everybody. So any questions for Crystal? And, Crystal, if I could ask the people on the line a quick question, show of hands, just raise your hand. How many people here have heard of the phrase, you need to spend money to make money? Has anyone heard that phrase? Only a couple of you. So that phrase basically means that if you want to make money, you actually have, you have to spend something. So like if you want to drive people around for a living, you need a car. If you want to sell something to make money, you actually have to buy the things that you're going to sell. You need money. And energy efficiency and a lot of the things that Crystal were just talking about are the same way. You would think that energy efficiency is something that people who don't have a lot of money would be really focused on. But to get those energy efficiency measures done in your house, to get your house insulated, to buy the more efficient systems, to buy a more efficient heating system, actually costs some money up front, even though it saves you money down the line. And so it's much more likely that people who are well off are going to take advantage of energy efficiency than poorer people. And so I think one of the things that we can think about in terms of projects that we can do or ways that we can help both address the climate crisis and deal with social justice and equity is help people that don't have resources take advantage of solar power and wind and energy efficiency as well. And we do have some things in Sustainable Jersey that relate to that, that can help people in your community take advantage of a lot of programs that the state has and Crystal and her colleagues are in charge of that help people make their homes, their businesses more energy efficient and ultimately save money. So with that, Crystal, thank you so much. I don't think we have any more questions. We really appreciate it. I'd just like to note to people that as soon as we're done, a survey will pop up asking you about the session. That's really important to us because we hope to expand this whole thing statewide next year. Your feedback will really help us make the case for that and also learn how to figure out how to improve this. We have this is part of a wonderful program and I want to thank our program partners, the Drumthwacket Foundation and Atlantic City Electric and Exelon Foundation for thinking up this whole thing and making this whole thing possible. And the rest of the sessions, the ones that are targeted at students, are on your screen right now. We hope you participate in more of them. And in addition, we have a number of sessions that are targeted at teachers. So you can see these are the ones for professional development for teachers, how to teach climate change, how to talk about it, and what resources are available to you. And then finally, don't forget, please participate in the climate contest. So this is all the preamble, the learning part of getting ready to do the contest. And the contest is where you actually go out, do your projects, submit a video, and if you win, not only does your school get a grant from us to thank you and to reward you, but also there's going to be a wonderful ceremony at the governor's mansion, Drumthwacket, to recognize the winning the winning teams. So that registration opens on March 15th. And then on June 11th is when the submissions are due. So this session will be recorded. We welcome your questions. You can reach us at New Jersey Climate Challenge at sustainablejersey.com. And we hope to see more of you soon at future sessions. Thank you all so much. And thanks again to our panelists.